Okay, everybody, we are here. We're going to be doing similar things that we were doing in class. I'm going to go into a little more depth about uh, what would be the correct rig for this mesh. In class, we had a center bone that controlled kind of the cockpit area. Then we had one that was controlling the hip, and then one at what would be the elbow, and then we had one for the foot. And the problem that was causing me is that when I move the IK handle, which controls the inverse kinematic system, it was actually rotating that foot joint. So what I'm going to do this time around is actually add one more joint, and we're going to make the joint that was once handling the IK, it's still going to handle the IK, but it's going to be our new ankle. So I'll bring that back probably right about here, and have the foot lead to the pivot point of the foot. And that way we'll have independent control of the rotation of the foot, and we'll still have a cool IK working system that will drive the foot. Alright, so let's get started. So because I'm working at home, hopefully I won't have as many crashes as we do in class. So hopefully this will take a lot less time. So first thing I want to do is make sure that my mesh is the only thing in my scene. It's the only thing I need right now. So I want to go, also I want to delete my history. I'm going to go to Edit, Delete All by Type, History. And you can see that I still have some transform data on some invisible objects. I can go ahead and just delete those in the outliner. You do have to keep an eye on those. Sometimes they'll still be linked to your actual geometry. So if you delete them right away and stuff is missing. Ooh, that's not looking good. So if you delete that stuff and parts of your mesh is missing, it was probably just connected to that in the first place, so you'll have to go back. Something happened to one of my extrudes over here. I'm going to fix that real quick. So the way I design my characters is with a straight line going through the entire thing. Which means that each side is duplicated, which means it's symmetrical. So this comes in handy, especially once you weld it back together. If something goes wrong on one side, you can fix it pretty easily. So I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to grab the side of the faces that has the problems to zoom in, make sure I get everything. I'm going to delete, and there was some stuff on the back which I have to get. Some more stuff right here, and a little bit more. Alright, so now I have half of my character, and I just need to duplicate it and scale it reversed. So I can do that, edit, duplicate special. I definitely only want one copy, and I don't need it to translate. But I do want it to scale, and that would be, in my case, in the x-axis. So remember x, y, z. X, -1. Hit apply. And now I can just select both of these and go to my mesh and combine. So now I have two sides of my mesh, but I still have a problem where the center line has vertices on each side still, so I have to merge the verts through the middle, and that's easy enough to do. Just need to go into vertex mode, marquee select the middle, and hopefully just the middle, and I'm gonna come around with my perspective mode to make sure. Yeah, you can see that I accidentally selected some stuff. Always good to come double check your work. Alright, that should be good. And then I'm going to bring up my merge vert tool. 0.001 means that the vertices basically have to be right on top of each other. So if I hit apply, I'm going to double check to make sure that it actually worked because it's such a small number. And it seems like it did. Cool. So now I have one mesh. That weird geometry that was going on, I'm not sure how that got there, but it is now fixed. and I'm going to go ahead and start rigging. So if you remember in class, the first thing we had to do to start animating is build a skeleton system. So we do that by going up to the animation window that's next to the polygons and deformation, and I want to grab the joint tool. So the first thing I want to do, like we talked about in class, is just analyze what my system is going to need. So we kind of already talked about this in class. We needed the one for the hull, the shoulder, elbow, and ankle. And once again, I said I was going to add that extra bone for the feet, and that will give us some more independent control over the angle of those. So I definitely want to add that. So I'm going to go into the right view. You can see that it's not quite rendering right, but that's alright. It should be fine for our purposes. I want to go into X-ray mode, and then I want to flip on the wireframe unshaded. And this is the best way to give you the most detail of your geometry, but still have an invisible mesh. I use these two modes paired together quite often. So first thing I want to do is create my first joint, my main joint. You can see that my joint size is very small, so I'll have to turn that up a bit. But I'm going to go ahead and keep creating these. The next one I want to do is right here. That is right at the hip. I'm going to do another one at the elbow. And we said it was right about there. Oops. I accidentally right-clicked and I forgot. When you right-click in that mode, you also create a new joint. So I'm going to undo. And I'm going to click on the last joint that I created, and that'll instantly create a new joint. The next time I click, it'll create a new joint in the right place. So I'm thinking about the ankle. It kind of just, in this case, it doesn't really matter because this whole piece of geometry is a solid piece. It's not going to bend anywhere. The only bending is going to be right around here, and that's where the foot is going to be. So it doesn't exactly matter where this ankle is going to be, but I want to put it kind of where, if this was a human, where I think it would be. That's kind of right about there. And then the next thing I want to do is put a center pivot right where I think the foot would be, and I think that's probably going to be right around here. Alright, so I went ahead and pressed enter, and that finished my skeleton creation. But once again, we can see that skeleton is dead center, which is exactly what it should be doing. And I'm going to go ahead and make the joint size a little bit bigger so we can see that a little more easily. So if I go under display, animation, and then joint size, I can pull those up a bit and make it more obvious for us. Alright, so like I was saying in class, the stock joint orientation is going to be set to face the child joint. So this joint is facing this one down here. Same with this one's facing that one. That works okay for our purposes. I think there's actually a dynamic way to change this. If we go into the animation tab and I look under skeleton, I can do an orient joint, and I can orient joint to world and hit apply. And now you can see that they are actually oriented to the world. So like I was saying, it actually depends on whoever's building your system. It will be up to them whether or not you will use this joint orientation or the one that we were using before. I'm going to keep it at the one it was before. I'm going to just undo. So like I was saying in class, the next thing we have to do is get our joints over. And like I was saying in class, when we move a joint, that changes the joint orientation. So you can see, I'm sorry, it doesn't move the joint orientation. So you can see if I move this, move it over to where I think it should be, probably about center in the leg. This joint is still pointing towards where it thought that center joint was, or the next hip joint, which was in the center. And because we're going to be mirroring this joint, it's once again okay. But I want to make sure that I come back and freeze these transforms so we don't get any weirdness going on later. So you can see all I had to do was move it over, and if I go into front view, I can make sure that is in the middle is, well, actually that was pretty lucky. It ended up just about bang in the middle of the leg. So, I'm coming back into perspective view, and then the next thing I want to do is create the corresponding joints on the opposite side. And once again, you can do this the old-fashioned way, which is the way we just did it, or if your character is completely symmetrical like mine is, you can just mirror this joint. So all you have to do to mirror the joint is to select, in this case, the main root, and then you come up into skeleton and mirror joint, and I'm going to bring that up. I'm not exactly sure which one of these. I can never remember which one is the ones we want. I think it might be XZ. I'm going to hit apply. Nope, that wasn't the right one. Oh, it just happened to be XY. I'm sorry, YZ. So I can close out of that. And if you hear any bells going on, it's my cat just hopping around. So yeah, so now we have a symmetrical bone system. But we can see that we have a problem right now. So what's happening is we have two separate joint systems. And this is a problem that I did not expect. So what I want to do is delete the ones that we just made. And instead of trying to mirror the center one, I'm going to try mirroring just the leg. We'll see what happens then. So that was actually the one I wanted to select it. That's my fault. So what we were doing, we were just mirroring another joint system at the 0 X origin, and it was basically creating two joints right on top of each other, and then two legs. But now, if we select the one joint in the middle, we have both legs in the hierarchy, and we can see that down here. And like I was saying in class, it's incredibly important to label, especially label your joints, because that's how we're going to view it in the in UE4. Any kind of game engine, you're going to want to have your stuff labeled, because that's the way we apply certain things like animations and a lot of other specific technical stuff. So just label them. So I'm going to call this the main root. That's kind of redundant. A root is the main joint, you know, like a root of a tree. That's a common name for the parent joint for all the hierarchy. So the next one to do is try and get this to rename better. Come on, Maya, I know you want to do it. Rename this joint. Oh boy. What I just did is I basically just asked to show a bunch of information which I don't want to see, which is all this stuff. And I don't know which one I pressed, so let's see. Show set members, show namespace, organize by layer. Interesting. So it was DAG objects only. So you can see, even sometimes I will go into Maya and make a mistake and try and suss out what happened. So if you ever have a lot of objects, including like the Lamberts and materials and stuff. So show DAG objects only. DAG. I'm not sure what that stands for. Back to renaming. I don't know if it's my mouse that's not working. Fine, I won't do it in the outliner like I should. Alright, so this is going to be the left hip. So what I'm going to do is specify that this is left, and then hip, left elbow, left ankle, left foot. Same thing with the right side. Right hip, right elbow. I'm sorry you guys are bored of watching this, but just trying to get the point across that is important. Right ankle, right foot. Alright, I'm going to save. And I'm actually going to save an iteration. 16x Walker _2. Alright. So, what's the next thing we want to do? Well, there's two schools of thought on the next step of the process. Some people like to skin their mesh to their bones first. I don't recommend that way just because you can get some weirdness going on when you start binding controllers to the skeleton. So I recommend doing the control surfaces on the skeleton first. So I am going to select my mesh. I'm going to create a new layer from selected, and I'm going to make it invisible. That way it's out of our way. And let's see if this works. It doesn't seem to. That's okay. Just a test. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is set up our IK handles, which stands for Inverse Kinematics Handle. So the way we do this is like we did before, which is selecting the main joint that you want it to influence, and then the last joint that you want it to influence. In this case, it's going to be our ankle, not the foot, because we want the foot to have independent rotation control. So the cool thing is that I just created my handle, but the handle is also controlling the foot. So you can see like that. It's moving the foot up and down because it's connected to the skeleton. But it doesn't have to influence the rotation of this next foot controller because we're going to add a separate controller, and I'll show you how that works. So the next thing we want to do is add an IK to the other side. Boom, boom. Piece of cake. So the next thing we want to do is start creating our control surfaces. And you can do this with the curves. I recommend doing the curves. There are some downloads that you can do that specifically script really cool shapes and stuff. And you can actually go in with the curves tool and make really interesting shapes. There's tools that help you make shapes in letters and all sorts of stuff. But for simplicity's sake, I'm going to keep things as little circles. So I just created a circle, and I'm going to hold down the V key, and I'm going to snap that right to the foot. And I want to make sure I name this. Actually, first I want to duplicate this. So I'm going to hit Control Duplicate, and I'm going to pull over to the side, hold down V, snap it to the right side. So let's rename this NURB circle to left foot control, right foot control. Alright, and the next thing I want to do is freeze transformation on both of these. I'm going to modify freeze transformations, and that's once again so that you can have a default zeroing, so that if you're going into your animation and you make a mistake and you want to return everything to the base pose, you just type in 0 on all your controllers and bam, it'll be right there. So what's the next thing we need? Oh, well, the next thing we need is a controller for the main body. So I'm going to hold down B. I just duplicated this circle, and I'm going to make this one substantially larger. I'm going to turn on my mesh real quick, make sure that it's big enough, and maybe kind of elongate it so it's easier to grab. So this is going to be our main body control. Main body control. Oops. Control. And then I'm going to duplicate that once more. I'm going to bring it out, and I'm actually going to slam this down to the ground. And there are a few names that people use for this controller. We're going to call this the world control. Alright, so I have to freeze transforms on this. And I'm going to select this one and hit the G key. That'll repeat my last action. And we have our basic controller set up. There's a couple more that we can get into, and maybe we will. So first I want to make sure that I can see my IK handles. They're actually very small at the moment. So let's see. Display, animation, IK handle size. That's a little better. Actually, it seems like I want to increase the scale of these. And I go into modify, freeze transforms. Alright. So everything's zeroed out. So the next thing we have to start doing is parenting. So, like we were using before, we can actually parent things by placing them within our controllers. So let's see if that would be a viable option for this. So we have our left foot control, and we want it to control IK handle 1, which is our left IK, left IK, that's fine. And this one is our right IK. Oh yeah, so what we could do is actually grab the left IK, middle mouse click, so that's using the scroll wheel and clicking and dragging into left foot control. So what that does for us now is gives us the option of moving this around. Now, I haven't tried this in a while. That might be a viable way of doing the IK rather than parenting. The thing about the IK is you don't have to worry about rotation so much, because it just controls the rotation of the entire limb. And we have another handler that we can use to control that a little bit easier. So for now, I'm going to try this setup. And then the next thing I want to do is grab my control circle, and I want to have control of the orientation of my foot joint. Now the reason I want to do that is so that when I grab my control circle and I move up my foot and I bring it from this side to side, I don't want the foot to be facing the main direction of these bones. What I actually want it to do is have its own independent rotation control. And we can actually do this by mapping the orientation of this sphere to this joint. So not only is this joint going to be controlling the IK handle in our hierarchy over here, it's also going to control the orientation of this joint, the foot joint, based on a parameter, our constraint rather. So I'm going to grab the parent, and then I'm going to grab the child. There we go. And I want to go into constrain, and I'm going to click orient, and I want to grab the extra options box, and I want to click maintain offset. And that's because the orientation of our joints are in the hierarchy scale where it's pointing to the last one. So this joint is pointing towards the ground. So if I didn't hit maintain offset, it would actually change the direction of this joint, and I don't want that. So maintaining offset just keeps everything the way it is and locks it in place. So all I have to do is hit apply. So now we can see a problem that we're having. So we have to think about this logically. So what's going on here? Well, this controller, the IK handle, is within this foot circle, which means it's going to follow the rotate. And that's not necessarily what we want. Basically what we want is for this controller, this IK handle, to follow this controller in space. We don't need it to follow the orientation, and we don't need it to do anything else besides keep it in one spot. So, is there a way to do this? Of course there is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the IK handle and pull it out of the foot control. And then the next thing I want to do is grab my foot control and then select the child. In this case, it's going to be the IK handle. And I want to go up to constrain, and this time I'm going to choose point, and I'm going to bring up that options box. I'm going to hit maintain offset, hit apply. So now what this is going to do is keep the IK handle in the space of this controller, but it's not going to care about rotation. The only thing that's caring about rotation in this point is the foot. You can't actually see what's going on because it doesn't render it that way, so you'll have to take my word for it. But when I rotate this right now, it's actually rotating this bone. Alright, so we've got that basically down. We have a foot controller that not only controls the IK, which is the whole leg, it also controls the orientation of the foot. So it's kind of killing two birds with one stone. You could create an extra handle that controls the ankle and then one that separates the foot. In more advanced rigs, it might be a good idea to do that. You would have an extra foot control that does a lot of extra stuff. But in our case, it's not really necessary. We can condense those two functions down into one controller. So now we have to do that with this side. Easy enough. Grab the parent and the child, constrain, orient, and I left the constrain offset, or maintain offset, on, so it's doing that for me already. Next thing I have to do, constrain, point. And now it's doing the same thing. Alright, so the next thing we have to do is parent our main joint to our new main body controller. So that's easy enough. We just grab the controller, and then the joint, constrain, and then parent. And you can actually see what's going on right now is something that we don't want. You can see that the feet are going up and down. I actually want those to stay in place. So I think I have to add one more constraint. So if we hold down the foot control and then and then the actual joint, I can go into constrain, and I can do a point constraint on that as well. So let's see if that makes a difference. So it seems to. It looks like we're still getting a weird problem though. And I might just end up having to parent this joint, or this controller, to the foot joint. If I look at the IK handle, oh, I'm sorry, if I look at the foot, I can see that it has the, on the right side, or the left side, it has the orient constraint and point constraint. If I ever want to get rid of those, I can just click on it in the highlight, in the outliner, and delete it. So that's what I did. I'm going to try parenting these instead, see if we get better results. Constrain, parent. It's already looking better. It looks like we might be getting some problems, but we'll have to suss that out a little later once we start skinning. So I'm going to do the same thing with this foot. I'm going to get rid of that orient constraint. And I'm just going to parent these. Parent. Alright, and we still have a point constraint on the IK handle. So that's still working. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is make sure that our controllers are acting independently of each other. Oops, let me make sure to zero that out. So this world controller is the one that we want to control everything. The scale, we want to control the movement of the whole object. So what we want to do is insert the main body control, both the feet control. We want to include both IKs, and we want to include the entire bone system. Now the only thing that we don't want to include is the actual mesh. And the reason because, and this, we were looking at this in class, is when you include the mesh and the skeleton system in this controller, it'll actually add 2 scalings to the mesh, because not only is, when you control this, is the mesh decreasing in size or increasing in size, the bones are too, and it tries to calculate both, so you get like a doubling effect. But if you leave the mesh out, you'll get an actual scaling, and of course our mesh isn't in there yet because it's not skinned, but we'll get to that next. Alright, so might as well go ahead and do it. We'll select our mesh, and then our bone system, and now we want to come up to skin, and we want to smooth bind. So we can probably already start playing around with what we got. That's looking alright. We're still getting some weird issues with rotation. And we'll suss those out in a bit. So the next thing I want to do is turn off my x-ray so I can see my mesh a little better. And what we want to do is start skinning, or start painting our weights for our mesh. So in class we talked about 2 different methods. The first method is kind of like the artistic way of doing it, and that is using the paint skin weights tool. And we can see if I hold down the B key and I drag back and forth, I can actually change the influence of the main root, which I'm selected on now. Opacity set to 1, value set to 1, so I'm actually painting the positive value of the joint, of the vertex influence. So there's a number of ways to do this quicker. One way is to grab all the faces that you want in like your main body. And this is the way I used to do it for a long time. And then isolate, select that. Go to the paint weights tool, and now we can just use the flood tool, which is down here. And now when I deselect, you can see that it's full white. And we can go to the next piece and the next piece and so on. But the way I recommend that you do this is by using the component editor tool. So let's do the left hip first. So first thing I need to do is grab all the geometry that I want included on my left hip. I think in my case it's only 3 separate objects. And then after I've selected the faces, I want to hold down the control button and right click. I'm going to go to vertices, and now it's just selected all the vertices within those faces. So then I have to go up to Window, General Editors, and Component Editor. And this will bring up this window, and the one that we're really concerned with is the Smooth Skins one right here. So I know that I grabbed all the meshes that I want to be in the left hip, and you can see that generally these are set pretty high on the left hip already, and that's just because the default smooth weight did it for us. But we want to make sure that these are all set to 1 because this is a mech. It doesn't have any bendy stuff. So I just click the top, scroll down, click the bottom, and it's set to 1. Left hip, value of 1 for all these verts, total 1. Cool. So now I can do the next portion. So I want to go into face, I'm going to select my meshes. And I kind of want these to be welded onto the elbow vert. So I can go 2 vertices, 2 vertices, 2 vertices. I don't know why it's redundant like that. And then you have to go to Window, General Editors, Component Editor. And now we're on the left elbow. Click the top, scroll to the bottom, Shift 1. Cool. I'm just going to leave this open for now. And then the next thing we have to do is the foot. It's all one piece of geometry in my case. And oops. 2 vertices, 2 vertices. Left foot. Click. Drag all the way to the bottom. 1, 1. Cool. So let's see what our results are so far. And you can actually see the foot is actually behaving like I had hoped it had, where the foot is not changing its orientation based on where the IK is pointed. It's actually only worried about what the orientation of this controller is. So I can change the controller to do all sorts of stuff. Cool. So now we just have to do it a couple more times. It's a piece of cake. It really doesn't take long once you get your methods down. And once again, this is something that a lot of artists don't bother doing very often. So they're not good at it, and basically they're paying other people to do that now. I have a friend in Boston that does this for a living, or at least a portion of this for his living. And you know, he started working at $30 an hour just because it's something that is actually really sought after. And that was as a temporary. I think he's being paid quite a bit more now that he's been hired on for full-time. So I forgot what I was doing. We have to go into General Editors, Component Editor. I think that's minimized somewhere. And this is going to be the left hip. Click. Oops. I'm sorry, no, this is right hip. 1, enter. All pretty easy. vertices, 2 vertices. I don't know why I keep exiting out of that window. So this is going to be the right ankle. I'm sorry, the right elbow. Oh man, does not like to be in the small screen. Right elbow, scroll down. Quite a few more verts this time. 1 piece of cake. I closed out of it again. I don't know why. 2 vertices, 2 vertices. Excellent. Last one. Can you believe it? We're done basically with jeez. There we go. We're basically done with our skinning. And we want right foot. So you notice in this process, we actually haven't assigned any vertices to the ankle. And that is absolutely okay. In the industry, it is okay to have bones which do odd things. This has a specific term, I can't remember what it's called, where you're using basically a joint to act as something. Basically, it's not influencing any verts, but it actually does have a purpose. So it does happen. An important thing to remember is that all these tools are used in the weirdest amount of ways to get any kind of job done. So don't hold yourself to kind of the standards, you know. Experiment with these tools and kind of see what you come up with. There's even some cases where you'll have a joint coming off of this joint in the elbow, and then that is used so that when you bend your elbow really tightly, you can use that to extend out the flesh so it doesn't kind of collapse on itself. So there's just a lot of tricks and trades to rigging, but I definitely recommend that you kind of play around with the tools and kind of come up with your own systems, because then you're doing something that's interesting, you're doing something that someone might have not thought of already, which is always valuable. So I grab my main controller. I'm going to increase the size of my, actually no, I don't like that. So now I can just move it around. Oh yeah. Feet do the same thing. Actually looks kind of neat. And this foot should do the same thing. Just to make sure, I'm going to rotate this. Make sure it's rotating right. And this rig is not exactly perfect, but it's all you guys are going to need for something like this. Of course, if you're doing arms, what you would do is create another bone off of this root bone, and the root bone is almost always at the hips, no matter what kind of character you're doing. We consider the hips the root joint because that's kind of the center of mass of a human being or any kind of animal, and it's kind of where the motion leads from, you know. The hip is usually the first thing to move in a character. So what you would do is you create another joint off of here, and maybe even another one, and this would act as a backbone. And then you'd create one about at the top of the neck where you're, actually usually it's a little bit lower than the middle of the neck. It's kind of like in the middle of your collarbones, but set in the middle of your body. This one acts as kind of like your center chest bone, and then you have ones going off of that which lead to about the edge of the collarbones, and then one off of that which leads to the actual arm socket itself, and then you go elbow, wrist, hand, fingers, and that's why I wasn't requiring you guys to do any kind of arms, because it's just a lot more work. And even feet systems almost never have independent toe control unless you're doing like a really big character with big toes, but a lot of the time they won't go ahead and do a controller for each joint of the toes. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and save. Cool. So what's left? Well, the only thing that we need to do next is our idle animations. So, like I was saying in class, idle animations are animations that are played in between static time for the player. So basically, whenever the player is not holding the controller and inputting any kind of or doing any kind of input, the character is just standing there, it's not doing anything. If it was absolutely static and the character was frozen in time, it would look very strange, and it looks cheap, and people have been working this out for a long time. Like we showed in class, Nintendo's been doing it with, Ocarina of Time, or since Ocarina of Time, they were using lots and lots of idle animations. And generally, it's really easy animation to do because there's not a lot of movement. It's something that's not always highest priority, but it's definitely something where you start off. So, like we were doing in class, we want to set up the timeline. So the timeline's here at the bottom. And the first thing I want to do is set a key for each controller at the very first frame. So basically what that means is that we have a first frame where everything is locked in place. So this right now is basically the pose that everything else will stem off of. So like I was saying in class, we have to make sure to copy the kind of static pose of all these controllers to the end of our animation. So we're going to do an idle animation, and this time I want to do maybe like 4 seconds. Because I'm lazy, it's 24 frames in a second times 4, 96. So what I want to do is set, oh, it's already set to 97. Interesting. That's actually perfect. Maybe I was subconsciously doing that. So the reason we want to extend to the 97th frame is because we want the last frame of animation to be the first frame of the animation of the loop. So if you had a 97 or a 96 frame animation, and the very first frame matches the very last frame, there's going to be, if it loops, 2 frames of information where the static pose is being presented, the first and the last. Now we don't want that. What we want is for the last frame to be the first frame that leads up to the, or it's going to be a frame that leads up to this bind pose, or this standard pose. So what we want to do is make the 97th frame, 1 frame after 96, our static pose. So I'm going to grab all my controllers. I'm going to hit the S key. So now what I can do is actually change this from 97, oops, and I want to do that on the right hand side, to 96, just to get that frame to where it's kind of out of reach, so I know I'm not going to accidentally mess it up. And then I'm going to hit play. So my playback time is actually in the correct time, but like I was saying in class, the Maya default plays it in like a render time, where it's rendering each frame as fast as it possibly can, and that's based on your computer's performance. But you want to make sure that it's set in 24 times so you get a consistent playback speed. So the way to do this is to go into settings and preferences. Preferences. And it's in the main settings. Time, we want to work in film 24 frames a second. If it's set to something else, please make sure to set it to 24. Like I said, sometimes we'll go into 60 frames a second for really, really detailed high-speed animations. A lot of like fighters will, or fighting games will go into higher frame per second stuff, because in that case it actually does matter. But for us it doesn't. So we're going to come down next to the time slider, and We have playback start and end. That doesn't really matter for us because we can change that dynamically. But we want to go down to playback speed. And you can see that it's actually set for me right now to play every frame, and that's actually not right. So even though it was playing back, it seemed like it was in the right time, 24 frames per second, it might not have been. So I'm going to hit the real time, 24 frames a second, and I'm going to hit save. So now when I play back, you can actually see it's quite a bit slower. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. So this is what we want. So what we were talking about in class is kind of like the fundamentals of animation, right? There's, oh, I forgot to include that. I'll put that up tonight. On the Moodle page, there's a fundamentals of animation video and the 12 fundamentals of animation guidelines. And please, please, please read over these. Even if you don't retain all the information, you'll have kind of a jumping off point for when you're actually going in and animating. But basically, it includes the secrets to movement. And you want to know that kind of stuff because it'll take your animations from going to like really kind of unnatural and very primitive to really cool advanced stuff with only a couple of really small rules to follow. So if you learn those rules and you follow them, and you're basically just stepping off where the last generation of really good animators left, you'll benefit from what they learned and what they studied to perfect. As artists, that's absolutely what we're all about. You know, we want to benefit from the last generation's work as soon as we start. That's how we progress. So, theory time over. What do I want my idle animation to do? Well, I'm going to look this up and see what we can find. Mech idle animation. So I usually start off with kind of an inspiration folder or inspiration videos, and that's the one we saw in class. And the reason I do this is because, once again, we're trying to work off of what, this is pretty cool, what last generation of artists or people that are actually out there in the world right now are doing. Always compare yourself with everybody else in the industry. Even though you guys are students, you're still artists. And it's important for you guys to consider yourself as artists because otherwise you'll never compare yourself to the guys that have been doing it for years and years. You want to be in competition with those guys because they're the guys that are out there that you're going to be fighting for jobs with. Alright, so those mech animations are pretty interesting. There's a lot of bobbing up and down, kind of looking back and forth. Actually, there was that cool animation where he like flipped around. I wonder if I could do that. Whoa, almost. Anyway, so if you're doing something with a lot of spins, it actually counts every rotation that you spin something around, so you don't have to do a full rotation and then set a key and then a full rotation and then set a key. If you're doing rotation stuff, you can just have your static pose and then go to like a certain point. I'm going to set it to 52, this will be crazy, and I'll rotate it 3 times. And I'll set a key, and you can see over here in the rotate X, it's actually set to 1076, which is actually really close to 1080, which is I think what I'll set it to. So now what you can see is it actually plays this animation, and what you can do is if you do a full number of rotations and end on a specific flat plane where it was originally placed, what you can do is, and this is a cool tool, you can come down to the next frame, which is 53, and set the rotate to 0. And basically what it's doing is rotating this bone within one frame, which means, and I guess 1080 wasn't exactly what we wanted, but oh, I forgot to set the key. My apologies. So now you can see that it does the whole 1080 degree flip within one frame, which means it doesn't actually move. So now after this point, it's set back to 0, and it's not some crazy value like 1080, but it's pretty much seamless. This would be the best idle animation ever. I don't care if it works, it looks good. Imagine the pilot inside. He's losing his lunch. So, if we set keys which we want to delete, it's actually really easy to go ahead and get rid of those. All you have to do is move the slider to the actual frame, and the gray bit is actually always going to be on the right side of the frame. And then you can just right click on the gray bit again and hit delete, and do that again, hit delete, and there you go. Setting keys is pretty easy. Not setting keys is the hard thing. What I mean by that is setting as few keys as possible with while still getting good animation is the end goal. You definitely don't want to be setting keys every frame unless you really have to, like I just showed, where it flips from one to the other, where you have really fast anime style movements where the arm goes from one frame to another. But if you want, and that's like a stylized animation. If you want realistic animation, use as few keys as possible. So, in animation, there's a couple methods to getting kind of the animation you want. And the one I'm going to talk about for now is pose to pose. So what pose to pose is basically taking the highest pose of every action that you want and keying those first. So what I want this character to do, this is going to be an exaggerated idle pose. I want the character to stand up and look over here, and then squash down and look over here, and maybe move his feet a little later. So I want 3 actions within the 4 seconds. And the way I usually do this is I play back and this is an editing trick, a film editing trick. Basically play out the time until you feel like it should be there. So it's going to start over, and right about there is where I feel like he should have his first pose. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to set the key, and then I'm going to immediately play it back. And that looks okay to me. So the next thing I want to do is key my next most exaggerated pose, which is when he crouches down and looks at something. So I think I want to do it quickly. So instead of having it kind of down here where it's one to the other, maybe he sees something he notices and then he juts down to see it really quickly. So maybe like at halfway point. I'm going to set it to 54, and I'm going to move the main controller down. I'm going to move it to the left, and I'm going to orient the mech there. So this is going to be a very fast motion because he goes from one extreme to another. So in this case, it kind of looks weird that he looks at it really quick and then he's like, eh. What you want to do is think about how like a person or an animal would look at it. And usually if something startles you, you don't just see it right away and then kind of just blow it off. You look at it for a second. So I'm going to take this key and I'm actually going to copy it. And I'm going to bring it forward a few frames, and then I'm going to paste it. Paste. Cool. Actually, I think I want this motion even faster. So the way you move keys is by, once again, setting the gray bit so that the key is immediately to the left. I'll hold down the shift, and I'm going to bring it forward. I really want to exaggerate this movement. Okay. That's starting to look pretty cool. What? Okay. You know, you can start getting the idea of like an animated character, um, which is usually a little bit exaggerated. So you know that thing that dogs do when they see something they don't understand, they like tilt their head? I think I'll add that next. So kind of in the middle between my static pose, I'm gonna rotate this. Set a key. And it might be too fast. It might be, yeah, it's definitely too fast. Or too steep of a degree of turning back and forth. And I think what I want to do is pull this back a little bit. And I think the next thing I want him to do is, after he looks at this for a second, is come back. I'm going to set a key right here because I know it's kind of in the direction where I want it to go. And then I'm going to speed him up on his return back. Like he looked at this, whatever he was seeing, and then he was like, oh, I need to get back to standing in place. So maybe he does like a bit of like a snapping motion. Let's see what that looks like. Whoa. Yes. Back to pose. And then I think I want to return them to 0 a little bit sooner. Be right around here. So then I can just go into here, type in all my zeros. Oops. 0. And then key. Hit yes. Oh, wait. So he returns to the animation really quickly, but I have a little bit of free space here. So what's something I can add? Well, maybe he just kind of bobs up and down. So I'm just going to grab this, bring him down a bit, and then I'll go back up. Alright, that looks pretty good. So the next thing I want to do is start adding some more detail. Something that I was talking about in class is when something follows a wave, it feels very natural. So what I mean by that is, instead of just squashing down like this, I want to set a rotation so that as he comes down, the head comes up first, and as he reaches his lowest point, a couple frames later, he hit the top of the nose, reaches the lowest point. So like I was saying, there's a little bit of a delay. So let's see what this looks like. 1, 2. I'm going to set this a couple frames high. 1, 2. I want to set this a couple ticks down. You can see that that wave gives it a little bit more character. So at this point, I start looking at what bothers me about the animation. There's one point right about there when he pops up, and then he returns down a little bit too quickly. So maybe I'll set this frame where he's at his highest a little bit lower, so it's not as exaggerated. And you can see now he has side-to-side motion going on. So there needs to be a little bit of a delay. So he pops up to the right, and then he comes down to the center. I actually want to give this a little bit of a rebound. And I have to make sure that this frame in the middle kind of retains a little bit of that rebound. And then kind of squats down and resets. What? Well, yeah. And there's another point in here where he straightens up a little too fast. '81. I'm just going to set some jitter. See if any of this makes sense. And I'm going to set some side-to-side motion here and here, just to give it kind of a little variety. Yeah, I kind of like that. It feels very organic. It's not really kind of mech-like. It's more of like a character would be, like an animated character. No pun intended. So the next thing I can do is maybe a second idle animation. And this is usually a good idea just because idle animations are usually not all by themselves. So I haven't used the feet controller yet. So let's go. I have to set my first frame to 97 because that's the frame where everything's static. And then I want to do 3 seconds of animation. Plus 97. So that'll put my final frame at 169. So I have to come down here, set up 169. And 97. And I'm going to add one more. I'm going to make it 170 so that we have that final frame once again, which is our static. So 170. I'm going to come in and I'm going to set my keys for the static pose. And I'm going to set this back to 169. And that's should be set to 97. Cool. So now we have a new palette. It starts at frame 97, which is the last frame of the one that we left off on. It'll become our new first frame, and we're going to take that from 97 to technically 170, which will be once again our final loop animation frame. But we're only going to animate until 169 because that transition from 169 to 170 will be played back as it loops. Alright, so what do we want to do? Well, maybe he's like really happy. So he's going to lift his head and like bounce his feet a couple times. So what I just did there is I kind of placed the timing where I think it would be cool. And I was kind of doing this in my head, so you'll have to forgive me. So squat down, stand up straight. So squat down, stand up straight. And then right about here, I'm going to start bouncing the feet. So let's do this. I have to hit S again when I move. And then I'll squat him down again as he stomps his feet. Da 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 da. Alright, so now we're getting into the feet. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that I set a static key, where I want to begin the stomping. So what I mean by that is I don't want to just set a key to the first stomp, because what will happen is it'll interpolate that from the beginning. So I have to make sure that I set a frame where it begins. So let's see. Squats down, squats up, squats down. This is where I want to start lifting the leg. Up. 0. I set another key to set it to down. Much too slow. We want to exaggerate this. So maybe within 5 frames. So 142, 143, 142, 143, 144, 145, 146, and then all the way to 150. See how that looks. Actually, I think I want to make this whole thing a little bit earlier in the sequence. So what I can do is I can press down to grab something, hold down shift, and then drag. And this can actually select multiple keys at once. So I want them to stamp multiple times. So I can actually just click and drag, copy, paste. Paste, paste. Yes, please. So left, right, left, right. So let's see. Left. And I want the right foot to start moving up as soon as I hit the point where the other foot touches the ground. And that's at 144. So I'm going to set a key at 144 for the other one. I'm going to go ahead 4 frames. I want to bring it up to its maximum. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 2 spaces. I want to hit that to 0. I'm going to key that. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. Shift select, copy, click, paste, paste, paste. Let's see what we got. Cool. So it's doing some interesting stuff. Yay. Something that you'll notice though is it seems a little robotic, and that's okay because it's a Mac, but it's not shifting its weight from side to side when it lifts its feet. So before I fix it, actually, I want to adjust the wave in this rotation. So set a couple frames down, and I'm going to rotate this up as if it's taking a moment to follow the rest of the fall. Down, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to set it down at its furthest point. It's actually a little bit too much. Every time I move, I have to make sure to hit S. Cool. And then let's get a little bit too high. I want to space that out a little bit, make it more of a delay. And I have to do it one more time. Stomp, 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 stomp. And I actually kind of want to increase the stomping on this. So I'm going to go to my highest point, and I'm actually going to pull that up a little bit more, even though I have some intersecting geometry. I'm going to hit S, and do it again. Because I didn't do it exact values, it's going to be a little bit organic because it's not going to exactly the same height as before. Cool. So the next thing I want to do is what I was talking about, where I want to change the weight of the main body to shift back and forth as he lifts his feet. So where does that start? He starts bringing up his right foot now at his left foot now at 136. We can check that by selecting the foot. You can see that there is a key at 136 where he starts. So I'm going to set a key at 136. And this one that we have at 140, I still want to retain some of that, but I also want to add a little bit of rotation this way. And you can see that this frame is actually giving me some trouble because it's snapping back to the natural position. And this is why we try to avoid extra frames. I'm actually going to cut that. So now at 145, when the foot touches the ground, he's kind of back at his normal stance. You can see that the rotation is at, is that our rotate? Oops. Yeah, so I think that is, oh no, we're actually rotating in Z. So X would be the up and down this way. Anyway, so we have him lifting up his side to lift up the foot, and then he returns to 0 at 145 when he starts bringing up the other one. So I want to rotate the body this way, so when he lifts his foot up, and actually I think I want to do it one frame earlier, so that the body leads with the foot. So he starts his body rotation one frame before he starts picking up his foot. And then I want him to start his body rotation one frame before he starts lowering his foot. So highest rotation is going to be 147. And by 148, I'm actually going to select this key, and I'm going to delete it. So at 148, he's still picking up his foot, but I want him to rotate his body. Maybe not that much. And then by 152, I kind of want him back to 0. And then once again, we have this side. Puts his foot down. Set to 0. Last time we have to do it. Frame, and he returns to 0. Very cute. I think what I might also want to do is set rotation for the side to side. So when he picks up his foot here and he's at the highest, I actually want to rotate this a little bit this way. I'm going to hit the key for set, puts his foot down, he returns to 0. He picks his foot up on the side. I'm actually going to get rid of this key. And I'm going to rotate him this way. Returns to 0, picks up his foot again. Rotate this way. Return to 0. One last time. Return to 0. You can see that one of these keys is a little bit too exaggerated. This one. Cool. So now if we look at the point of the nose, you can see that there's a little bit more going on. Stamp, 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 stamp. Alright, so I don't want to spend too much more time doing this. I know you guys are probably interested in going into working yourself. But one last thing you can do is play the whole loop. What's that? Whatever. Stamp, 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 stamp. Cool. So this is all you guys need. The next step would be to bake all these animations down. So what's happening right now is that the animation data is only on the controller handles. If we look at the bones, they don't have any set keys, but we want the bones to retain the animation data because that's what's brought in to a game engine. A game engine doesn't care about your controllers. The controllers are only for us in Maya to help us animate, and then the animations are baked directly onto the bone information, and that's what you import. So at this point, you guys will be done. If you got an animation done, you don't have to do 2, but of course it doesn't take very long, so I recommend that you do 2 just to have a little bit more to show off. And you might just want an animation that is literally a boring kind of idle animation that just loops and loops. That could loop for about 10 years and it wouldn't look strange. Kind of just bobbing up and down would be a good one. This is a bit more detailed. Alright, I hope this video was helpful for you guys. If you have any more questions, of course you're always free to give me a call, email, all that stuff. And I imagine that you might have more questions this time around because this is more technical work. So yeah, if you do have any questions, let me know and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Thanks guys. Good luck with your projects.